there is something to say about the scientific community in the sense that we all need to stand together. We cannot let those of us who do the actual climate science just defend themselves, but I think we should show solidarity as the larger community of scientists to all those, like my colleague Andrew Dessler, who do receive actual death threats.
This is Greg Harmon at deceleration.news, and I'm reporting this week on the March for Science in its local and international dimensions. You just heard Dr. Gunnar Schade, an atmospheric scientist at Texas A&M University and keynote speaker at tomorrow's March for Science San Antonio. He's speaking about the abusive and threatening behavior of some climate change denialists who are encouraged in their messaging by some in power who claim calls for urgent climate response to rising temperatures are just one big hoax. Schade is one of two guests this week on the subject of the National March for Science, both as a phenomena and in its local expression here in San Antonio, where the year's march, a little earlier than what's going on elsewhere, is our third. And here it's dedicated to the passage, or hoped-for passage, of a climate action plan for the city. Though nonpartisan, the March for Science spun out of a particular political moment of resistance. Donald Trump had just been elected. His inaugural day crowds were embarrassingly low, but he can boast that he was greeted days later by the largest day of protest in U.S. history. The Women's March on Washington involved as many as 4.6 million people around the country. So on Earth Day, a couple months later, there came what has been called another unprecedented eruption, and this time from the scientific community, a protest for science. To get the local picture on that, I spoke with longtime friend Peter Bella. Bella is known here in San Antonio as the former Natural Resources Director at the Alamo Area Council of Governments. He's a fellow steering member of the San Antonio Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, member of the Coalition Climate Action SA, which includes dozens of community groups here, pressing for, among other things, the closing of our last remaining coal plant by 2025. And he's also this year's March organizer. Opening the lens a bit into the world of climate science is Dr. Gunnar Schade, who joins us in the second half of this podcast. First, here's Bella.
I think that one of the reactions to this most recent administration in many ways has been the willingness to get in the streets here in San Antonio, because that's not something that I know traditionally as a native of San Antonio. But during that first event, I believe that the quickness with which that event was organized very much gave root to a willingness to get together. There were 1,700 people, is what the Express News estimated. 1,700 people for that 2017 march held at San Pedro Park Springs and the SAC campus there. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge event.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm guessing you're describing your background, right, in environmental health and in service and natural resource research, ozone. That there was an easy tie-in, right? I mean, this was the first March for Science. That was Earth Day. It was a partnership with the Earth Day Foundation. I don't know if that's still the case, but how much of your own history and concerns kind of led you this direction? I mean, that was a climate environmental science literacy, I think, was what the first march was, kind of the theme was.
Yes, very much. I think air quality has always been, in a lot of camps, very popular as a theme, but that doesn't mean it's well understood. There's a lot of difference between ozone and carbon as elements for air pollution. Yeah. But it was very much, and has been for the past 30 years, very much a critical awareness concept to educate people on what carbon is and what it means. And I'll admit that I was not particularly carbon literate for a long time. I was focused on ozone. Mm-hmm. And I think that I was one of a number of people who became more and more woke to the concept of the dangers of climate change. That's
a really important point. I'm glad you bring that in, because I was reviewing the original vote. So 2017, we had a mayoral runoff election, right? And we got Ron Nirenberg came into office. This was and so literally weeks after Trump announces on June 1, he was going to try to get the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, which actually takes several years and it's a little complicated. But, we have this reaction and we get a commitment to the principles of Paris and we get this pathway to a climate plan locally. And yet, when I was reviewing the video of the council conversation, that's one thing that became really clear to me is that there was not. Most of those members, or many of the members, did not discern the difference between the historical conversation about air quality in San Antonio, which is you better watch out, the federal government's going to, tax your gas or withhold development funds or something if you've got a lot of soot in the air, or asthma, or ozone, and we're voting on a climate plan, and so that was really interesting, and I think. And one of my kind of like lingering suspicions is that limit on climate awareness or literacy has kept this plan from moving forward as it should have. And so, anyway, that's a really good distinction. And I don't know if you are seeing that or hearing that from local officials.
Not to throw stones at the existing city council makeup, but I think that there are city council members who don't have that kind of technical background and who aren't. I mean, I appreciate the concept that being a city council person or being a mayor requires an incredible bandwidth, an incredible mental accessibility to a whole host of difficult issues, not the least of which are the common pedestrian issues of traffic and police and safety and all the others, garbage pickup. So when you get to the point where you're talking about these, what might be more esoteric ideas like climate, I sympathize with the fact that, in fact, there are people on the council who really are not very familiar at all with what it takes and how to distinguish between the different kinds of air pollution. And that's a critical need because of the risks that are foretold by science, the risks that are predicted, and even though they're in the future, the immediacy of the need to act now. All of that is critical thinking that needs very much to be on the tip of the tongue of every politician and ideally every San Antonian.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only point is, not to throw stones, but to point out that really a lack of literacy, which March for Science is about bringing awareness, the importance of this a certain level, right, of awareness, informedness, and valuing of the scientific method and research in the community. There's consequences, right, when we don't have that, and I think part of what we're seeing right now is an example of that. But before we get into the cap itself proper, this is I get the sense that that in the past, March for Science has not gone deep into local politics. This may be the first year that a major local policy issue was the agenda. Is that accurate? And if so,
that's accurate.
How did y'all reach that decision?
Well, from several points. Frankly, again, the first year we had what we colloquially describe as the Trump bump that got us 1,700 people out in the streets. And the second year we made our focus simply the idea that science was evident in San Antonio's history. So we held our second march at Jefferson High School, which is home to several Nobel Prize winners in science. They went to school there. And that was our focus. And we had about 400 people show up, and we thought in terms of how remote that location is, how unseen we were in our march, even though the theme was good. So the third year around, we wanted to continue the process, and it became pretty evident that both as an issue that needed addressing, climate science, climate change, as an issue that was very real and immediate in local politics and planning processes, that it was kind of a sort of a no-brainer to take on the concept of, as you were saying, climate awareness, climate education. This is one of the goals of climate science in broadest terms is, like you're saying, climate education, or rather scientific education, scientific awareness, scientific literacy, advocacy, especially when it comes to the planning process in political systems. So it became, once we sort of thought both in terms of how we wanted to increase our own effectiveness and people's awareness of the issue of science advocacy, it became clear that this was really a cause that needed to be championed.
Excellent. Well, I'm really appreciative. I know a lot of people probably are as well, that you've taken that initiative, particularly since we've had this delay. This was originally going to be an April vote. Some of us have been working on this for over a year, you and myself and many others.
Right.
So yeah, it's a really critical moment to continue to advance this this priority in this cause.
Yes. Yes.
Now I think I mentioned earlier, and I served with you on the Climate Action Adaptation Plan Steering Committee, and knew you prior and found you through this process. Well, let's just say willing to ask repeatedly of the city of Natick, of CPS Energy, to advocate for data, right? And you were one of those members that was always after just give me the data sets you guys are building your assumptions off of. I want that certain level of access that I think we probably never got. So how would you describe generally your experience serving with the Climate Action Plan and the product as it's been delivered, as it appears today, I guess, as it goes through future revisions? We'll see what comes, but what we got.
That's a tall order, because I'm trying to sort through the differences. With the ozone planning process that was at ACOG, we had what was, in fact, a full emissions inventory. We had a location for every quote-unquote polluting source, including the speciation of emission, the cycle, the rate of emission, everything. We had it even down to population surrogates for data that we didn't know, such as painting the houses with VOC, with paint, that when the paint dried, it gave off fumes that helped make ozone. In this process, there are no standing emissions inventories the same way.
Right.
It's very much up to those operating the emissions inventory protocol and gathering the data to begin with a series of assumptions. And as you say, we haven't had those assumptions made clear to us. We don't know in any great depth at all what those assumptions are and what that means as far as what numbers they put in what sort of process. Now, I have just almost parenthetically, I have offered, and I would hope that in conversation with Geekdom, I have talked. I'm a co-working space person at Geekdom. I'm not on staff or anything like that. But we had a presentation by Doug Melnick in the city of San Antonio on the plan, thanks to Jason Pittman, who is also with Geekdom in the same co-working. Well, he actually has a solar company that works out of Geekdom.
Energy Technical Working Group of the CAP, is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. And yeah, he was on buildings and energy. And during that conversation, it became clear that there were a lot of people in the audience at Geekdom during their presentation that had very deep technical questions. I offered to have Navigant come in, make presentations on the depth of information, and talk to this crowd. Again, I think part of the hesitancy might be that it is very technical, it is very geek-like, and that might provide some hurdle as far as not knowing that we would understand what the heck was going on, which I think is ill-founded if that's true. But the bottom line is, I'm trying to turn over every stone I know as well to open the doors for the clear understanding of what the bases are, what the assumptions are, and how the process really works. I don't know that there is that ability right now in the contract that CPS Energy and Navigant have. I don't know if there is still money in the bank, as it were. I don't know if we'll see Navigant again. But I would very much look forward to remediating what I also see as, I don't see it so much as a lack of transparency or a lack of partnership, as it's not as important to them as it is to us, as I really think is what it boils down to.
I should say Navigant Consulting. So the original, this plan was developed, I believe, there was originally $500,000 dedicated to the creation of the plan and research and public outreach from CPS Energy to UTSA. UTSA was kind of cut loose as a partner as the source of independent data generation analysis. in favor, it appears, through the process of Navigant Consulting, which has done previous work, I think, for CPS and has since done work for the San Antonio River Authority.
Correct.
And so it's hard to say, like you're asking about, the data. I mean, even the money is maybe complicated, but
yes.
Yeah, your point is noted. I just to kind of step over this body in the street. There is a data set out there with your name on it, and you won it.
Yeah, it's a data set with our city's name on it. A data set of what their assumptions are and how the thing works and how the model runs.
Yeah.
And it is my main criticism, and again, I'm sorry, but I'll have to go geek you just for a second. The concept of, not knowing what the assumptions are that lead you to certain predictions and calls for certain strategy implementation, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how to do that with an analysis that includes the kind of data we're looking for. And I'm fine with widely varying assumptions. I'm fine with large error bars that say, well, I might be right and I might be wrong, but let's talk about it, let's define it, let's understand it and move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and I come in, I've got, my critiques and other organizations have theirs, obviously Deceleration plus the
yes.
state and the local Sierra Club that I'm affiliated with are all members of Climate Action SA Coalition, and I know you've been deeply involved with that, which is, dozens of groups that have made their priority advocating for a climate plan for San Antonio, and one that's based on equity values and principles.
Yeah.
And we're close. There's a gaping, there's an opportunity we're missing, in my opinion, and I think that fair to say CASA's generally that we have been advocating for definitive interim targets. Where we're going to zero by 2050. Can we move a little faster? Let's make sure to get our coal plant done by 2025. Net zero in the electricity generation sector by 2030. There's this, and
Correct.
Again, it somewhat gets a little wonky as you go down the list of demands, but it is to say, I guess my point is just that supporting a plan, supporting climate action, recognizing deficiencies, continuing to advocate for those. Now I'm watching, as I know you are, the conversation, the draft plan comes out, we have to contest with what's there, what's not there, and the process as we participate in it, pros and cons. But now we're faced with kind of like this huge blowback in the business community by the SA Chamber of Commerce, by the Manufacturers Association, Valero Energy, oil and gas interests, obviously, who apparently had no idea that they were, expected to fade into the twilight, which this is a process happening all over the world. So somehow this was a shock.
Right.
But so now we know that. So Doug Melnick, the chief sustainability officer, and the mayor's office, we've had these communications that go out. Well, we have this to be still to be done. Kind of this short list that Doug put out saying, we're going to look at the business case for action, so they want to make that more stark. And there's a bullet on there: clarify the intent of the equity framework, and just odds and ends that comes directly out of kind of like this the outcry, right, from those who are certain that short-term gain and profit will be jeopardized by a plan that will certainly create the ability of any of these agencies and businesses to function in the decades' time. But can you imagine, I guess, a climate action plan, let's say we get, another month, 2 months, 3 months, and finally into the fall, where we get a plan, what would it look like that you would walk away from?
Tough question, because for in my mind, I guess I'd really just have to see what it would look like. I can't now imagine disagreeing with a plan that had the proper players at the table, that is, including the oil and gas, and anybody who is disagreeing with the plan and anybody who's agreeing with the plan. If there's a plan that is comprehensive of the stakeholders in the region and has a pathway forward, even if it's not the speed and depth that I feel technically needs to be shown, I would welcome that plan. In other words, again, I really am very mindful of the quote-unquote Paris compliant trajectories that Navigant had shown to members of the committees and then to the public, that shows how quickly and how deeply the cuts need to be made. And that's something that I will carry forward with me.
Which wasn't then, interestingly enough, reflected in the plan itself.
Right.
So, yeah, we had different charts, by the way, everybody.
Yeah. And we have different charts that are published as part of the draft plan that's available to the public now for review.
Right.
So I am accepting of the plan, knowing that it is not a quick business, knowing that it is clearly generational in impact, which means that it will be years in implementation as well. I accept that, especially the radical nature of the change required to really, truly achieve means that in some case there's virtually got to be compromise. And I wrestle with that, but I also know that we'll have to see how hard we can push and how far we can go.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't resist. I mean, just because we're in such a state of flux, I'm just going to order those questions on my lips for everybody right now. And so moving in, we're just over 20 minutes, and coming up, we are less than a week away from the march. Sell it. I mean, when you meet somebody on the street, you're over, bagging up at HEB or what have you, and someone says, March for Science, what's that? Do you want to just invite folks out, let them know what it is in your own way?
Yeah, so very much. So March for Science, again, is a science advocacy, science education group that supports through a lot of different ways, be it the ability of universities to get research monies so they can carry grants that does research, or the ability for us to teach in public schools what the vast reach of science is. I almost said climate change. So we have a very broad advocacy when it comes to science that does include policy development, facts-based, evidence-based policy development. So in the great scope of things, that's what March for Science itself does. And so the march this year will be one that advocates in terms of that same evidence-based planning process for the climate plan that is before the city. And again, in my view, the climate plan before the city is eminently worth supporting and eminently worth making sure it's as strong as it can be. That's the point of this coming Saturday's March for Science.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Gunnar Schade got on the radar for many for his research into the public health impacts of fracking, but he's also made headlines earlier this year when he joined dozens of climate scientists and those in related fields to challenge Texas Governor Greg Abbott on his deflecting of a journalist's question about the impact of global warming on 2017's Hurricane Harvey, which caused, you may recall, extensive damage in the Houston area and beyond. Climate scientist Michael Mann and others have suggested global warming made that storm more destructive via its artificially warming of Gulf waters and increased moisture in the atmosphere, as well as likely storm surge. Somewhere into the second half of our conversation, Gunnar and I have a disagreement that may, on its own, make for an interesting subject in a future podcast. He stops me when I suggest that global warming requires a total remaking of the global economy and in short order. He suggests that I have adopted what he calls our myths about global warming that in turn alienate conservative Americans and thereby make climate action more difficult. So my statement is premised on a range of sources, including, not least among them, the most recent report from leading contributors to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which states that preventing the worst manifestations of global warming means, quote, rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land, urban, and infrastructure, including transport and buildings, and industrial systems, end quote. These are, it says, quote, systems transitions that are unprecedented in terms of scale. So there's a lot to read into there, and the report unpacks those models as likely in critically avoiding a full 1.5 degrees of warming, which includes changes in high resource use consumption patterns. So there are future conversations to be had as to whether those in the United States, now one of a few nations pulling away from the Paris Accord, will insist on maintaining their high resource consumption lifestyles at all costs, or if there may be room for everyone else. Another installment, perhaps. But this week, we are fortunate to have Schade here sharing his insights on climate, Texas, the nature of denialism, and here, my first question, what difference a city climate plan can make? Here's Schade.
Any of such plans are important for the simple reason that the climate responds to the accumulative amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So any reduction we can put in place is going to help. Mm-hmm. That's a very straightforward thinking on it. So even if you cannot do a lot, anything you do is going to help. That said, somebody has to make a start, and since we are lacking on the international front, we're not lacking behind anywhere on the activities on the small scale. Counties and cities like San Antonio can make a huge difference, and that's because cities are big sources of greenhouse gases. It's where a lot of people live and where a lot of these greenhouse gases are generated. So if we can make a big difference on that front, that helps a lot. Mm-hmm. So whoever starts it and gets in gear with these kind of activities will have a leg up in the future. And since most people live in cities, and since more and more people live in cities, these will set very good examples that can be transferred to other cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think San Antonio, like Austin, is pretty unique in that we own our utility, and we recently shut down one of our coal plants that was averaging over the last 10 years over 5 million metric tons of greenhouse gas CO2 equivalent, a year, and we've got one remaining that we're working, those of us in the kind of the advocacy community, to shut down by 2025. That's been averaging over 7 million metric tons. So yeah, in the city to city landscape, there's a lot we can do. I definitely agree, and now I really respect and appreciate you, I have to say, as a scientist who's been out there really actively advancing and defending climate science, going so far as recently signing on and perhaps helping to author this group letter to Governor Greg Abbott in, I think it was January. He was backing off or trying to worm out of a question about how global warming had contributed to Hurricane Harvey, using that really well-worn deflection, among so many politicians that, hey, I'm not a climate scientist, right? Well, here's a group of climate scientists and experts in, atmosphere, yourself, atmospheric studies, and writing that, offering your services, right? And writing at the time that climate change has been having a devastating impact. I think those are the words on Texas. What would you say? I mean, you've got a minute to describe the interplay of warming temperatures and Texas. What's going on? What are you observing?
Well, what we see throughout the climate system is that the extremes are becoming more and more common, and the average person is not experiencing the globe's average temperature, which is the hallmark of climate science in terms of the graphic that you see reproduced over and over again. Mm-hmm. But what we actually experience on the ground is often the extremes. We can live with a summer that's a little bit hotter here and there, but once we get extremes like 2011, the drought of 2011, we get a feeling of what it's going to look like in the future. So the forecast is that the average summer temperature in the year around century is going to be like we had in the summer of 2011. And that's going to be the average summer, not the hottest summer. So you can imagine where this is going to go. We had billions and billions of losses to the state in 2011. And if that's the average summer, then how many billions is it going to cost us when we get a hot summer mid-century? So that's the temperature side. Then you look at extreme rain events such as Harvey and other large rain events that have caused floods. These are events that once they keep coming back every 5 or so years, which in some places they might, you will see, at some point you will see that we are not going to reconstruct. People will leave the area. You will get migrations because people cannot afford rebuilding because they cannot see a future for themselves anymore in these areas. So unless we start reconstructing with future climate in mind, we're going to just put ourselves back into harm's way, and we're going to get flooded again and again and again. So the big problem is not necessarily dealing with one extreme event. The big problem is that event is going to come back at a higher and higher frequency, which eventually will overwhelm any ability to bounce back. And that is the part that we may still have time to avoid, in the sense that we have to get into gear with mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, such that we're not going to enter that worst-case scenario, which we're well on track of hitting for by the end of this century.
Now, we're kind of at a place, at a moment in national politics and the national conversation where there's a lot of it's not just kind of anti-elitism, but anti science, really. I mean, that's where March for Science kind of erupted from. Science is no longer or informing policy in a way that it used to be kind of agreed upon language, and I think folks, there's even a sense with a lot of folks, unfortunately, that hey, they could listen to you go through that entire litany of where we are, where we're headed, and say, hey, everybody's got an opinion. Mine may be good, just as good as yours, but there's something called the scientific method, and I think people aren't always aware of how we know what we know and the process by which we accumulate this information. So, if I could dial you way, way down, could you describe that briefly? Dr. Dessler was here and he said, look, we've been studying climate change, global warming, what have you, for literally, nearly 200 years. We've been looking at, how the greenhouse gases, influence temperature globally. And can you kind of just walk through very, very basics on the accumulation of this information, what the scientific method is?
Not in really a few words, but it's any process in science starts little with somebody discovering something that looks interesting, and we build it up from there. There's the famous saying that if I have achieved anything, it's because I've stood on the shoulder of giants, right? Which basically means that there has been a beginning, but we don't know exactly where it came from, but there's lots of people who have contributed me achieving something in science, and you can apply that to virtually any field of science. The fact is that climate science is much, much older than most people know. It goes back to the beginning of the 19th century and had advanced enough by the beginning of the 20th century that the basics were known, namely that there are greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and if we raise their concentration, it's going to get warmer. The researcher who quantified that was Svante Arrhenius, Nobel Prize winner, not for this research, but since he was Swedish, he to him, this was actually some good news, but he expected this not to happen until hundreds of years into the future.
Better farming, right?
What he did not foresee, but which became clear only half a century later, was that humanity was developing so rapidly and so rapidly increasing its consumption of fossil fuels that it was clear to scientists in the 1960s that we were on the path to a significant warming by the end of the century, which meant by the year 2000. And so the first warnings that these effects were coming were sent to the president in the 1960s. Yeah. So we essentially have presidential statements on climate change since the 1960s. Every president had to say something about this, but nothing ever changed. And that's still the situation to this day. That has nothing to do with the scientific process. That is completely due to the political process and a few quirks where the United States stands out against other nations, such as the media landscape.
Yeah, I remember stumbling across, I think it was an early paper, I guess it was a contractor written maybe at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory or somewhere like that, and essentially painting this picture of a future with the assumption that policy response would be giant walls all around the United States, and that seems to be the moment that we're in today, though without a sober conversation about some of these forces that are driving migration. But what about backlash? I mean, there's researchers I've spoken to in the past who I know have received death threats. You know, this conversation has become so politicized by some parties that it's a hazardous landscape, and I'm just wondering how you have personally decided to be very frank and to be very open and outspoken on the subject.
Well, since I do not directly publish in climate science, I do not fall under the category of scientists that have to be brought down by the people who think they have a large say in this field, but all they have is a big mouth.
Yeah.
So they're very outspoken, and in some cases they have the backing of large think tanks, which gives them entry into large newspapers, where they can publish op-eds that are perceived by other people as factual science and not the pseudoscience which they represent. While I have not received any personal threats other than from weirdos, there is something to say about the scientific community in the sense that we all need to stand together. We cannot let those of us who do the actual climate science just defend themselves, but I think we should show solidarity as the larger community of scientists to all those, like my colleague Andrew Dessler, who do receive actual death threats and have their email conversations pulled, misused, and mined for quotes of things that you can pull out of context in order to smear these people.
Yeah, I asked him a very similar...
There has been plenty of character assassinations in the field of climate science.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Years ago, talked to Michael Mann, and he's got stories, and Catherine Hayhoe has stories, and Professor Dessler, his response to this question was, hey, I don't want anybody to ever say I didn't warn them. His conscience, speaks to him, pricks him on this point, and but it's also important to understand. So a march like we're having, or the origins of the march, while it came out, it was an Earth Day event and was dedicated to raising awareness and understanding of environmental science broadly. It doesn't take, science doesn't take sides. There's inconvenient truths, large and small. The largest ones, perhaps, related to this conversation, the subject of this conversation being that, we've got this momentous challenge to basically recreate our entire economy in a very short time to get off of fossil fuels onto renewable energy and many other transitions.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it recreate the economy. What you have to recreate is the way we produce, distribute, and use energy. That does not mean basically. Even though you have a very strong background in this, what I hear you do is you have, like many other people, adopted some myths that are actually not true. This is how some people many people, unfortunately, especially on the right, try to drive the conversation into a corner where it doesn't belong. We're not talking about having to change our lives completely. All we have to do is change the way we produce, distribute, and use energy. That does not mean that we're not going to drive cars anymore in the future. That does not mean we won't have computers anymore in the future. That does not mean we're not going to eat potatoes anymore in the future. Most of what we do every day today, we're going to do every day in 50 years from now. It's just that we're not going to fuel it anymore by fossil fuels.
Well, I guess I'd be interested in what other areas or other myths, you hear me advancing, but I guess I would dispute that point on simply that, I think a lot of times also we use climate change or global warming as shorthand for many colliding ecological crises. One of those is, a devastating, extinction crisis, mass extinction, and loss of huge amounts of the ecological services, habitats, and what have you, decimation of species in the oceans, and these are about consumption. So I think there is a big conversation to be had about the way we live, and that we just can't continue to consume and gather wealth with clean energy. So I think that's a bigger conversation. I don't think that I'm out on a limb there. But if there's other areas, do you think I am?
No, you're right in the sense that once we decide to switch our energy production system away from fossil fuels to fossil fuel-free energy systems, such as renewables, we may also realize that the way we consume may not be sustained by that other energy system. That remains to be seen. There are a number of processes of production that we use right now that use so much fossil fuels that we will probably think those over and say, this is probably something that we won't be able to do because it's not sustainable once we have switched our energy system. So I think changes in consumerism will inevitably follow from our change of the energy system. I wouldn't make one conditional on the other, but I would hope that we're not going to switch the energy system, but then keep destroying ecosystems by other means. There are plenty of other reasons why our certain areas are affected environmentally and we're losing habitat, not for reasons of climate change, but for overpopulation or consumption reasons. So you're absolutely right. There are other reasons to be environmentally concerned other than climate change. But some of them can be addressed in the short term, while the elephant in the room needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah, I see kind of a reflection with our local plan, and it seems, I think one of the things people object to is when they start seeing the prescriptions, right? When they, on the one hand, this goal 2050 net zero climate pollution. That's one thing. But when you have a list of these prescriptions and they think that's going to be the mandate, then, hey, not this, not that. I don't want to lose this or that and the other thing. But we really, that's what we kind of look for in this process, like you're describing, science, the scientific research as it evolves to inform policy, because this is really completely dependent, on good research, and that does change, like you're suggesting. Well, maybe it's not what we think it's going to be on the other side, and so that's a good point. So this also begs the fact that there's some smaller inconvenient truths, and I know you've looked a lot at or I guess it's more urban forests, maybe contributing to pollution, mixing with human industry, industrial pollution, or human sources. And there's a kind of a startling or a headline that came out. It probably didn't take you by surprise, but this is about methane, and I know this is also an area of yours, but out of the University of Delaware, where they're saying, hey, there are forests that may be producing more methane than they're absorbing, and I've grown up always thinking more trees, more forests indiscriminately, but it's complicated, right?
Yeah. So there's new research I haven't delved very deep into yet that shows that there may be other methane sources that are significant that we haven't dealt yet with. However, they're not globally that important yet. We're still trying to figure out how important they are, but they're certainly not dominant on a global basis at this point in time.
Okay.
So I think with respect to especially the part of the plan that says we need more trees, more greenery in our urban area as a form of adaptation, that's a very good idea. Most cities will follow that path, and it's because we have very good data that shows that tree planting in urban areas is extremely beneficial for air quality and for temperature, lowering daytime temperatures in urban areas. And this is really something that is going to be a big problem for Texas in the upcoming decades, because the summer heat, which is exacerbated in urban areas, needs to be dealt with. And one way to do so, one way to ameliorate that, is to plant more trees in urban areas and make sure that they are healthy. The shade and the water that the trees evaporate bring down temperatures very significantly, and that is extremely helpful, both directly and indirectly, through lowering the amount of cooling that we have to do. A single tree in your backyard can lower your cooling costs by up to 10%. So this due to both its water evaporation and its shading during daytime.
Now, I appreciate that, and there's also obviously psychological well-being and mental health that folds into natural landscapes, trees, and the rest. But
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. The social aspects are not even mentioned.
And I promise not to keep you very long. I wanted to comment on your signature file in your email. You've got a quote there from Marie Curie that was
not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay, this was an older one. I guess I was looking at an email from earlier. But what does it read now?
It doesn't read anything because we have been ordered not to have these in any of our emails. Texas A&M policy.
All right. Well, previously, let me give you an opportunity to talk about previously. You had a quote, nothing from Marie Curie, nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. This is fairly profound. What in that speaks to you in this moment that we're in?
Well, what I see is what you just mentioned a few minutes ago, that once we are planning concrete changes, what motivates people to oppose them is fear. And the reason they do so is because they fear for their own future, for their own economic future, for their children. It's because they cannot see the path ahead very clearly. None of us can. But instead of responding with fear, we should respond with hope and with looking forward, which is something that the United States has been extremely good at compared to very many other nations. I can speak to that because I grew up in Germany, and a lot of what we do is look backwards. For very good historic reasons, but we are just not historically very good at looking forward with a good dose of hope and just the peace of mind that it will work out. So, as a German, I grew up with a hefty dose of skepticism. But as an American, I have to say that you cannot go forward with fear. You have to go forward with the attitude of, we can do this. And the only way we can do is let's get started and see what works best, and then take it from there.
Wonderful. And it sounds like maybe something that might be seeding your offering at the march. Is that a message we might be hearing on Saturday?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. Really well. Well, thank you again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you then.
All right. See you on Saturday, I guess.
Yeah. Take care. This podcast is a production of Deceleration, findable online at deceleration.news. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes as well as Stitcher, or come into the main body, deceleration.news, and check us out, subscribe, and we will see you, hear you next time.